Chief, you're recognized.
Thank you to the representatives in the committee, to the ladies and gentlemen in the audience. I'm Steve Gahanagan, the Chief of Police at the University of Arkansas Police Department. I've been employed there for about 13 years now. What I would like to say is that campus law enforcement represents thousands upon thousands of faculty, staff, and students at our universities. I also want to recognize the members of the Arkansas Association of Campus Law Enforcement Administrators that are also in the audience. And from our last meeting, I can tell you that all of us stood or is against the passing of this bill. Now let's not gloss over that. Nearly all of your campus law enforcement administrators in the state of Arkansas oppose this bill. Now I want to recognize Representative Collins in his efforts and what he's trying to do, because we both believe in the end game. And the end game is safety for our students, for our faculty, for our staff, and for our visitors to the campus. The difference is our approach to accomplish that safety for our students, faculty, and staff. Now, to do that, I want to give a little bit about my credentials. I have 33 years in law enforcement. I have been a firearms training instructor, not really where we go to the range and shoot at that steel target. I'm talking about where we have to stand in front of a screen and make shoot and don't shoot decisions. I've been a member, the only campus member in Oklahoma of a city SWAT team, and I served as a SWAT member for several years. There's a trophy that I have back there that I can't display right now, but if I were to read from that trophy, the last 3 years when we were doing competition shooting, you would see the name Gahanagan's, which is my name, and I won it 3 years in a row before they stopped it. I think they were concerned I was going to win more. Now, I would like to say this. Even with all of my training, even with my background, if I were to go in front of a screen, like a movie screen, and go through high stress, quick decision making, I still today will sometimes shoot the person that I should not have shot, even with that type of background. Now let's talk a little bit about police training. And I'll just speak because I know about this at the University of Arkansas, but I also worked at Oklahoma State University in Oklahoma. We would train on the firing range anywhere from 3 to 6 times a year. And due to Columbine, we now go through active shooter training on a frequent basis. This is very important. We train on how to control for implicit bias. Think about that. When an officer has to circle a corner and he sees a large man with a gun and a small woman with a knife, who is likely to get shot in that circumstance? Based on the way we've been raised and everything. Only through training do we can see something like that and control for that and to try to help us make sure we're making the right decision. We learn how to train under pressure to where we can control our heart rate when we're faced with a panic situation. We train to be aware of our environment. We don't only just draw a weapon and shoot at a suspect. If this young lady was the suspect, I have to take into consideration all of you standing behind her before I make that choice to discharge my firearm. Let's talk about ammunition. Officers have to train and actually have discussions on what type of ammunition are we going to use so that we don't over-penetrate walls and things of this nature. Let's contrast that. But let me go back to the environment. When you talk about school shootings, I have an employee of mine that was involved in a shooting in the early 80s. A young man brought, I believe it was a shotgun or a long gun, into a sorority, and he held them hostage as well as a few others. When he arrived, he explains to me, and he works for me today as an executive security manager, he says, that when I had to assess the situation, there were several times I thought I was about to take that shot, but I could not because of being observant of who was in the room, what was in the background, what if I miss. But fortunately, circumstances presented itself to where he could stand at a position, and when the young man took a step, raised the long gun up, that officer took that shot. And he was able to neutralize that situation, and many people that were in that sorority credit this particular officer for his heroic actions. But more importantly, his actions under stress, his control. And when you ask him, how are you able to do this? He said, because of my training. I'm not a hero. It's not because of me. Thank the people who trained me to be prepared to be involved in such a situation. Now let's compare this to concealed carry. My wife has a concealed carry, and I hope she will never hear what I'm about to say. I've seen her shoot. I intentionally put her under stress. She works for the university, and I would never support her carrying a gun on the university campus. But when you talk about concealed carry and what they have to go through, I have a couple of instructors at my department, and I asked them, what do they have to go through to really be prepared for the type of stress situations they may find themselves in? They said, well, I take them to the range, and depending on the instructor, some may shoot 10 rounds, some may shoot 15, some may shoot 20. It's really at the discretion of the instructor. And I said, that's it. That's right. And so then they can go out and carry about whatever type of weapon, pistol, if you will, that they want to carry, 44 magnums or what have you, any kind of rounds, what have you. They will be allowed to do that. And we as law enforcement will go through years of research, the FBI assisting with that research to determine what is probably an appropriate round, especially when you speak about working in a campus environment. Let's talk about accidents. I've heard Representative Collins present these statistics, and I typically try not to ever get in statistics because depending on the side you're on, you can make them say what you want them to say. But let's talk about accidents. When we say that you can buy weapons and have them in your homes for your home protection, if you were to pull the data up, have those guns, whatever the weapons were or are, were they really used to protect from the bad guy entering and harming your family? Or have more accidental shootings occurred where family members have killed other family members in the heat of passion? We can all reason, because I believe all of us in here are reasonable people, that when you bring more guns to the table, then you have to understand you bring more risk. There are many statistics out there that would show that someone will more than likely be killed by an accident than an active shooter. And let me point to two examples, and I can give you example after example, but I'm trying to be sensitive to the time. We were young, went into a house. The friend wanted to show the shotgun. He brought the shotgun out, showed it to us. We admired it. Next thing I know, within minutes, my cousin had his head blown off. I was a part of that. I was the one that went and grabbed the shotgun shell that loaded the shotgun that killed my cousin that was like a brother to me. Well, some of you would say, well, you're just kids. Well, let's raise this up to the adult level. On our campus at KUAF, a young man wanting to show his gun, showed the gun, but for whatever reason, that gun went off and he blew his hand off, or parts of his hand off. There have been police accidents. Many of you don't have the privilege of looking at a police blog of where we're looking at publications that are telling us how officers are being killed every year. And many of those officers are being killed primarily due to accidents. And we're well trained. We know how to empty a gun. We know we're supposed to empty a gun. When I was at Oklahoma State, we had an accidental shooting, someone dry firing. didn't fully check, the gun was not completely empty, and when he fired into the bulletin board, there was another officer standing a foot away. At the University of Arkansas, similar situation. A young man practicing dry firing in front of a mirror, and guess what? The mirror exploded. And these are trained police officers. And I can go on with example after example after example. Now, when we talk about the bill, and I can't go into all the details of why I would have some issues with this bill due to time, it seemed to me to generate a lot more questions than answers. But when you talk about accidents and these statistics, well, we had 20 shot here in this year. We had 3 shot here in this year. We had 15 shot in this particular year. Well, in 2013 alone, the Center of Disease Control said there were 130,557 deaths due to accidental shootings, due to the presence of firearms. 4th ranking cause of death. Now, what are we currently doing? We say, well, if we don't support this bill and we don't allow our faculty and staff to carry weapons, then what are you doing on your college campuses to try to keep the students, faculty, and staff and our visitors safe? Well, let me share a few things with you. We have what we call a behavioral intervention team, threat assessment team. Many universities have that type of committee on their campuses now. We put systems in place to be able to pick up on what I call the clues of when someone may not be acting appropriately, and so we are flagged to where we put them in that system, and then we begin to check things out. We have law enforcement representatives, student affairs representatives, general counsel representatives. We have representatives that represent a cross-section of the full university. That's very important. We have engaged in campus safety and advanced law enforcement response training. For instance, at the University of Arkansas, we teach avoid, deny, defend. Now, when you talk about precious seconds and precious minutes, we are actually instructing our students, faculty, and staff on what they might do if a shooter were to be on their floor or enter a classroom. And that is avoid, deny, defend. Some other programs call it run, hide, fight, and you have other types of programs that are going on across the nation. We also teach a 4-hour class called Civilian Response to Active Shooter Events. This is where we actually put the faculty, staff, and students through practicums, where they get to hear what a gunshot is or what it's like. And we have blanks, and we put them through scenarios where they have to make some of the quick decisions like law enforcement officers would have to make. We have Rave Guardian, where they can have an app on their phone where they can have instant communication with loved ones or significant others or their friends or even the police department if they need that for their protection. So there are many things that are taking place. I would just say that when we, on either side, when we present statistics, do your own homework, do your own research. Ask yourself how many people are being killed by an active shooter compared to how many people that might be seriously injured or killed through accidents. And I don't want to gloss over this. Well, when you enter the room, because in the city and things of that nature, they've been able to manage it well when you're confronted with a shoot or don't shoot situation. I will share with you, being a trainer in this area, it is extremely difficult to round the corner if you have multiple guns involved trying to figure out who's good and who's bad. And God forbid if we shoot the person that we should not have shot, like we sometimes do in training. And I'm talking years upon years of training. But I will say this, if this bill is successful, and if it does pass, I would like to see further legislation that will make it absolutely clear that officers have full immunity, the universities have full immunity, and I would ask that you think about the civilian that might make that decision to pull a firearm and discharge it, and they shoot the person that should not have been shot. And so I would ask for you to take all of this into consideration. I think there are many issues with the bill that needs to be answered, but I do appreciate all of our efforts because I think we all want the best for our faculty, staff, and students at our university. And thank you, and I'll entertain any questions at this time.
Representative Ballinger, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First question, and you may have mentioned this and I missed it, but who are you actually speaking on behalf of? Are you speaking for yourself or are you speaking on behalf of the university?
I primarily came out for myself, but my position is in line with the university as well. I've met with the administrators. I really was delighted that I would have an opportunity to come down and speak on this particular subject because it's somewhat personal to me.
Has the university asked you to come down and speak?
I had communication with them. They informed me about what was going on, and I inquired about the ability to come and speak, and they said it was open, and I took that opportunity.
Okay. May I follow up? Do you generally support, I'm going to assume if your wife has a concealed carry permit, you generally support a person having a concealed carry permit, is that correct?
Well, yes. When she got the concealed carry, it was sometimes when we travel and things of that nature. And so when she wanted to do it, I did not stand in her way of doing that, but I try to keep it in its proper lane for her when she's at home for protection, or if she travels to another city because we have family where she travels, she would carry that concealed carry. I still wonder, and I asked her the other day, I said, could you actually shoot someone? She said, well, if my life was in danger, if someone else's life was in danger, I could. But I do know this, that she still needs further training because she has not been put in situations where she really has been called upon to have to make that final decision.
So what is the difference of the risk then of, your wife or someone like your wife being shot by you, not by you because you're focused on the campus now, but by an officer in some other location carrying? So if she's in a position where she's needing to protect herself and she has a gun and an officer comes up and sees that, are you saying that they would likely not have the training and likely shoot her? And if that's the case, how can you support concealed carry permit holders for the average public? Or would your position be that you think that maybe she's actually better off and safer in protecting herself having a firearm? And if that's the case, then how could that be that much different than in a university setting?
I feel much better because I've sent her through my training to where when an officer arrives on the scene, she specifically knows what to do with that firearm. She specifically knows what to do and what not to do. So I have confidence in that regard that I'm comfortable that if an officer were to come to the scene, that she would hopefully make the right decision. But we don't know because she hasn't been put under that tremendous stress. Keep in mind, when you talk about in a university, you're talking about, like at the University of Arkansas, for instance, there's 8 square miles. So we have extraordinarily quick response time. When you talk about our shooting in the year 2000 in Kemple Hall, our response time to that particular shooting was 45 seconds, not anywhere near 15 minutes. If we have a critical incident on our campus, I am confident, and I have stated repeatedly, I believe our response time would be probably under 2 minutes, and I really believe under 1 minute. I really have the trust that we have the ability and the officers in place where when we learn of an emergency, I've been extraordinarily impressed of how quickly we can respond. So you can imagine when we respond to the scene, it would help us not to see multiple people with guns and having to decide which one is causing the havoc or poses the most danger.
So, may I follow up one more? So what you're saying then is that if the same type of training that you've provided your wife, if that was provided, you would support this legislation then?
I would say that I would not support this legislation in a college environment. However, if this bill were to pass, I would definitely say there would have to be some significant training for those that would carry on campus. But I would not support it the way it is written today.
Representative Charlene Fight, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we have all seen those bumper stickers that say, when second counts, the police are just minutes away. I would ask you, you said you can be anywhere on campus in 45 seconds to 2 minutes. I've been on the University of Arkansas. I graduated from there. I find that difficult to believe. How many police officers are there that you could cover that entire campus in under 2 minutes?
Well, typically when we've had a significant incident, I would say it occurred in daytime hours. But let's take that, what you're saying. We may have anywhere from 3 to 6 officers out, but that's not including all the office staff. We know how to take the trails to get where we need to go in a very, very quick way. So, for instance, we purchased 2 electric motorcycles. We are now training to, what if the traffic was heavy and it somehow caused us or slowed us down? Those electric motorcycles can go over the land and get us there quicker if we need to get to a particular location. What I'm saying is based on reality and my observations of when we've had a situation occur, that we can get pretty much anywhere we need to get very, very, very quickly, even negotiating around traffic. We have had discussions about, well, what do we do when there's a football game and we know that all the streets are very much packed? We've even strategized on how to get to those locations because we have bicycles, we have foot patrol, and we have officers that can move relatively quickly to several points on the campus. I'm just saying from our history, it appears as though that we certainly can make it almost anywhere within 2 minutes. But, you know, there could be an occasion where we don't, but it's still quick. But I understand we have support agencies that will also be responding to a high-risk situation like that, such as Fayetteville Police and Washington County Sheriffs. So we have a large law enforcement community that can respond, as well as federal agents.
Representative Rushing, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll first start by saying that this question is, I think, something that I'm glad that we're addressing here in the state with this discussion, but also probably needs to be taken at a national level as well, because there's always incidents and discussion on this topic. But as many of you know in this room, that I was a representative back in November that tweeted about the objection to the Lady Razorbacks taking a knee at for the national anthem. Now, that incident is not related to what we're discussing today, but I got hundreds of emails, phone calls, texts from students, professors, and administrators asking me if I understood the First Amendment right and the freedom of expression and the freedom of speech. Courts have consistently ruled that public colleges and universities under the First Amendment cannot bar free expression from their campuses, whether that expression is by students, faculty members, or others. So today, I want to return that same question in regards to the Second Amendment right to bear arms. Do we as a group not understand that Second Amendment right? And which one is more important, the First Amendment right or the Second Amendment right? And why do we get to pick and choose which one is more important when both of those rights are granted to us under the Constitution of the United States?
Well, I would say typically when you talk about the amendments, there have always, and I think exists, exceptions because of the circumstances or the reality in which we live. Even though there's a Second Amendment right to the right to bear arms, I don't see any issues with laws being passed where there needs to be exceptions. My position is I think universities, colleges, community colleges fit into that mode of being that exception. We're institutions of higher learning. We have professional police forces there. And even with that, we have professional city police departments that can assist, state police that can assist. And so we have an assistance where we have professionals that can come and handle high-risk situations. To open the door to say just anyone can carry a firearm, because then I guess you would have to say anyone 21 years and above, and I know we're not talking about students, we're just talking about faculty and staff in a college campus. Even though there's a right to bear arm, I think there are always going to be exceptions, as we have found on these types of amendments.
Follow-up. Would you not agree that sometimes in these protests that we see on campuses, and not even on campuses, but there is almost as much violence without weapons that happen?
Mm-hmm. What's your question?
I'm asking you, would you not agree that you see violence that happens during these protests, during freedom of speech
Well,
protests?
you have violence that can occur without weapons or with weapons. Yes, you do.
Thank you.
Representative Gray, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First thing is I wanted to follow up on Representative Ballinger's question. I just need a straight yes or no answer. Are you here on behalf of the university?
I don't know if I can answer that yes or no. They were okay with me coming here.
Okay,
I'm
then-
here on behalf of Steve Gahanagan, but the administration was okay with me coming here to speak.
Okay. Are you currently, are you on leave today? Are you currently being paid by the state of Arkansas?
I'm on duty today.
All right, thank you. We'll follow up with that at a later time. If I could have a follow-up question. You mentioned your response times. First thing I would like to do is request from the university documented response times be presented to this committee at some point. But how many rounds can a shooter get off in 45 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes? How many rounds?
But it depends on the weapon they're carrying. So if they're carrying a high-capacity weapon, they can get off many rounds. But you also understand that just because we would say a faculty or a staff member is able to carry, I don't think there's any duty for them to act. And when we say that, now if I'm a criminal also, let me add this, that when we pass something that says a faculty and staff member will be the ones allowed to carry, I can tell you, like I think I heard another representative say, that I would, as a criminal, probably go to that particular faculty member or staff member first and commit crimes against them before I would turn to other people, because I know that they are allowed to carry that weapon. So I don't think you can just kind of brush that off if these people are really thinking about and strategizing how they're going to hurt others. But even if I were a faculty member and I had a concealed carry, I don't think there's anything there that says I must act if an active shooter comes to the scene, because I may panic. I may not act due to the circumstances that I'm in. I may decide to follow some of the tips that we've been teaching. I may attempt to avoid and leave the scene while others may be shot and killed. So to assume that every faculty or staff member may act in a high-risk situation, I'm just saying I don't think we can do that.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of the beauty of it, is that this would allow all faculty and staff to conceal carry. So it's not like the shooter, unless the faculty member is waving a gun around, the shooter's not going to know which faculty or which staff are armed, and that's part of the deterrent process here. So speaking of that deterrent process, have you studied the shootings at all at Virginia Tech? And if so, what would you have done differently? They're not allowed to have a no weapons ban on their campus at the time. What would you do differently in the same situation to prevent one of the largest mass shootings in the country?
Well, at that time, and Christina Anderson, I've had several conversations with her. She was a victim at Virginia Tech. At that time, we weren't really doing a lot of training in the areas of how to avoid, deny, defend, where we actually go into the classrooms and we show students, faculty, and staff what you might do if you were faced with similar circumstances like what happened at Virginia Tech. That training really wasn't off the ground. Now that training is almost becoming a mainstay at many of our universities, where they have options before they maybe felt they didn't have those options. Typically, if I were to walk in this room, many of you without training would dive underneath your table, giving me an opportunity to execute you. But with that training now, you would know how to respond and act that could neutralize a potential attacker from being able to harm or kill people in mass numbers. So the training that's taking place now, I think, is much more prevalent than it was back at Virginia Tech. So that doesn't change my mind in my position, that I think as an institution of higher education, carrying weapons is best left to the professionals that train and go through high-risk training, can control for implicit bias, and they kind of know what they might do under that pressure compared to giving faculty and staff these weapons, and we have no clue what training they have had in their past.
Okay, and this is my last question. That shooting, I think, if I remember correctly, was, spanned over like 2 hours, and there were 2 separate incidences of essentially 2 mass shootings by the same person on that campus. So in my personal belief, that if someone on that campus had been allowed to actually defend themselves, we might not have had 32 people killed, 17 injured. There were others jumping out windows, that might not have happened. Are you telling me that the training that you would have provided me as a student there, based on what you train now, would have possibly saved my life?
I'm convinced if they would have executed, if that training was there, that the number of people that were shot and killed would not have been as high. Now, we can't guarantee anything, because even if you arm your faculty and staff, if I have the motivation to walk into a room, then I'm going to probably successfully harm, seriously injure, or kill several, even if they were armed. So nothing's an absolute. So what we are talking about is risk. What are the risk levels? And I think we all can understand more guns will equal higher risk. And sometimes a higher risk for those that are individuals that should not be at the end of a bullet.
This is your one warning. Any more outbursts like that, any more comments, and you'll be asked to leave the room. Okay, there's certain decorum that we try and respect in the House of Representatives, whether you're for or against the bill, and I expect that will be carried out both here by the committee and the audience. Representative Ballinger, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The comment, more guns, higher risk, there's actually some truth to that. So as a gun owner and person who uses a gun, I understand that you treat a gun, as a kid, I was told like a poisonous snake, right? You have to make sure you realize that there's some risk associated with it. And so that's true. However, you've said that your wife carries. Is your wife putting everybody else at risk by carrying the firearm? Or is she providing herself and others some safety in doing so? And let's not even use your wife as an example, but could a person who's well-trained, in the case of a professor, they've got some sort of advanced degree, they've proven that they're capable enough that they're actually educating our kids. We've invested them with the future of Arkansas and these children and these, young adults. Would you say that in some situations, actually a firearm would produce less risk or more safety? And wouldn't you say that, especially since you're in law enforcement, you would agree with that? Wouldn't that be correct?
If I were a faculty or staff member and I had the background and the training and so forth, absolutely, I would feel that there could be an application of using that weapon in a way that could save lives. The issue is this. As law enforcement officers, we have documented training. We can show you documentation where we are going through training multiple times a year under high-stress situations, and we still sometimes don't make the right decision. With the citizens, we have no documented training. We don't know any of that. But if this bill were to pass and there was a faculty or staff member that has the background, let's say, ex-police officer, or they did whatever was necessary to up their training in a way that they would probably more so be in line with making the right decision, of course they might be successful in everything. But the situation still, though, is this, that when we arrive at a scene, we see weapons produced. Right now, as it stands, because we have policies in place against weapons, the law does not allow the weapons on campus. We can then make a somewhat fair assumption that the person that's brandishing that gun is potentially our suspect. But even then, we have to be careful, because it could be that person that defied or went against the policy, went against the law, and decided to carry on campus. So even under those circumstances, we have to be careful. But at least we know that if that person has a gun and others do not, then we can quickly identify that that person is the one we need to be putting our attention towards.
One follow-up. I kind of muddled that question, so I'll forgive you for not answering it, because that's probably my fault. But really my question is, in situations like your wife carrying, would you agree that there are some times that more guns equals more safety? And then if you don't agree, then could you explain why?
Multiple police officers arriving on the scene is more guns. I believe in absolute increased safety because of that training. Now, when you go back to speaking about civilians, such as my wife and others carrying weapons, can it bring about a safety situation, or can it bring about where no one is seriously injured or killed, or the person that posed a threat is the one that is neutralized? That's very possible. But I still don't back down from the fact that when you talk about multiple guns being present, when law enforcement officers are arriving at that scene, I'm going to still say the risks are going to be very high, and the potential is high that someone that should not have been shot is shot.
So then my question would be...
Point of order. How many, do we get one question and one follow-up?
I believe I've allowed leeway for a number of members. I was allowing him one further follow-up, and then we'll proceed.
Just to make the record, I had to beg for that follow-up, just so the public and everyone knows. Okay, so in this situation, are you putting, or is your wife putting people more at risk by carrying a firearm, or is she putting herself with more safety and the public with more safety by her carrying a firearm? And if that, whichever your opinion is, could you kind of explain why you would either allow her to carry a firearm or not?
I really can't answer that question. I mean, you're asking a question, is it more at risk or less at risk? And we don't know what all the circumstances are. Depending on some circumstances, it would put it more at risk. Depending on other types of circumstances, maybe it's less risk. It's hard to answer that question when there's so many variables that come into play to lead to the reason why there's issues with this bill, in my opinion. There are so many factors that you have to consider when you talk about discharging a firearm in a situation. And when a faculty or staff member is breaking up a fight and the individual turns towards that staff member or faculty member unarmed but has an aggressive style, like they're about to strike that individual, and this individual has a weapon on them, are they more likely and quickly to draw that weapon for their protection and shoot someone that's unarmed, that's being very animated and angry and expressive about how they feel? On the behavioral intervention team and the threat assessment team at the University of Arkansas, there are faculty and staff members that come across our table that we have to evaluate on whether or not they are suitable to remain faculty or staff members at the University of Arkansas. So we have things in place to where we can pick up on these clues and have early intervention. And the answer is not, well, let's arm our faculty and staff and hope that they are going to protect others and protect the public when we have professional law enforcement on those campuses that are charged to do that job.
Representative Tucker, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, Chief, I just want to thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I've been a student at the University of Arkansas during your years of service there, and so I've personally benefited from your service. So I want to thank you for that. And I think 33 years in law enforcement, we all owe you a debt of gratitude. So thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I also wanted to just follow up. I wanted to make sure I was understanding part of your response to not that those questions from Representative Ballinger, but before, when he's kind of asking you to reconcile the differences between concealed carry generally and then on campus. And I know you've referenced training and background that people have, but I thought I discerned part of your answer was that for concealed carry in general, you're dealing with the world at large, and there's a huge scope and territory that police officers have to cover, and there's a lot more, because of that, there's a lot more variability in response times. And for college campuses, you have a much more contained territory with law enforcement right there on site, and so you have a much greater degree of confidence in the response time. And so I thought that was part of your answer, and I just wanted to make sure I understood correctly if that was one of the distinctions you were drawing between concealed carry licenses generally and then concealed carry licenses on campus.
Representative Tucker, you said it perfectly. That's exactly how I feel. In a college campus, we are serving a very educated community when you talk about our faculty, staff, and students. I think it's a little bit different when we're talking about the world at large and when we're talking about traveling and going into areas that might be considered high crime areas, high risk situations, and the such. We're unique in the sense of campus law enforcement and the community that we serve. And I think the safety aspect of it, especially as far as carrying weapons, should be left to those that are fully certified and trained.
Representative Gray, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So roughly 10 years ago, I was at a college as an employee, and I was an interim vice president for finance at the time. My college president was off campus, and I was made aware, so I was in charge of the campus that afternoon. I was made aware of a disgruntled employee who was on social media threatening his former supervisor and his fellow colleagues. They just happened to work at our daycare center, which was right up the hill from where the administrative offices were. So I'm in charge, and I have a building of 40 kids, the ages of 5 and under the care of his colleagues and his supervisor. Let me ask you, without a security guard on campus, because we didn't have one, we still don't necessarily have one there full time at this particular college. Without a security guard, without a legal gun on campus, what decision would you have made if you were me?
If I understand correctly, you had information or intelligence information about someone that could pose a potential threat, and you were in charge of children, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. What we typically do in our environment, if we feel that there is any kind of risk or any kind of threat, we call the police department.
My police department was 15 minutes away. What would you have done?
Not knowing all the circumstances, we still will call the police department, and if they have jurisdiction over the facility and area that you're speaking of, we would give them the intelligence information of what we have, and we would ask them to please have someone come and patrol, because you didn't have a violent situation occur at that instant. You're just talking about preparing and hopefully preventing something from happening. So that, with some forethought, would have been to contact the police department to have them provide extra patrol for your particular area based upon the information that you have. And that's what typically happens when we have someone that feels that they're involved in a high-risk situation. They simply call us, and we provide the officers or the assistance that they need to help make sure everything is safe.
Yes, and I appreciate that, and we did call the police, and they were 15 minutes out, so I was left with a disgruntled employee who we had knowledge was on his way to the campus. I had students on campus, I had faculty and staff, and I had a building of 40 kids in it. One of those was my daughter. It's not about the risk. Mm-hmm. What I'm hearing you say is it's about risk. It's about response time. Mm-hmm. Had he shown up without having the ability, I have a concealed carry, but without having the ability to actually defend myself or the people that I was in charge of, it could have been another Virginia Tech. Mm-hmm. So would you not agree that this is not about risk? This is about response time.
It's not that simple. When you're talking about carrying weapons, it is about risk. It's about response time. And when you're talking about the situation that you're describing, you're talking about locking your facilities if you know something is about to happen, securing yourself as best as you possibly can if you weren't allowed to carry a weapon. Now, that's not to say that if you did have a concealed carry and that person was to come to the campus, still nothing is guaranteed. But you might think in your mind that you've given yourself a chance if that person were to arrive and put the kids in danger, or even yourself in danger. But if I had foreknowledge that that possibility existed, then I would have taken measures to make sure the doors were locked, everything was locked down as much as we possibly could, and I still would make that request for some type of law enforcement or security professionals to come and assist. Now, absent any of that, let's say that you didn't have any of that, and you carried that concealed carry, and that person came to campus and the conditions were right, that you were able to use it in a way that successfully protected you and those kids, then that was a win. And no one's going to sit here and say that was a bad decision or whatever the case may be. But when you talk about holistically and looking in general, across the board, across your state, across the nation, and you look at data in its totality, I would still lean on the side that it is a higher risk for faculty and staff, and in some cases, in some states, students are allowed to carry, that it presents a higher risk than the fact that an active shooter would come to campus, largely due to the accidents that can occur. And I think the statistics will bear that out.
All right, we have two more people who have indicated they have questions, and then we're going to move on. We've got Representative Rushing and then Representative Maddox.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll make mine real quick, and even though maybe it's a little bit off topic of what we're actually discussing, it is a statement that you made during your conversation, and it's just a simple yes or no question, and that's all I need is a yes or no. But early on in the conversation, you made the statement that you didn't want your wife to hear this, and maybe I personally took offense to it because I am a woman with a concealed carry. But you said that you made sure that you kept her in her proper lane. Do you feel that maybe you might owe your wife an apology because she took that concealed carry class just like everybody else did, even every man in the room? That, why does she have to be kept in her proper lane?
Oh,
and like
well,
I said, just a simple yes or no, do you feel like you owe her an apology?
I appreciate you trying to get me in a yes or no, but my wife also keeps me in my proper lane. But we're husband and wife, so please don't take that out of context and try to twist it a certain way, because it certainly wasn't meant that way. It's a husband and wife situation where I was just trying to explain that my wife has some level of training, but not to the level of training where I would feel comfortable of her having to make decisions under high-stress situations because she hasn't been exposed to that. That's all that I was trying to say in that regard. My wife, I think...
I think you've answered that sufficiently.
Thank you.
Representative Maddox, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you for coming and testifying today. As someone who served as a deputy prosecuting attorney for many years, I have the utmost respect for anyone and everyone in law enforcement. But in my experience, and I believe Representative Collins alluded to this, would you agree with me or disagree with me that Arkansas concealed carry gun owners are extremely responsible with their guns?
Well, I would say it looks, it's because we're not hearing a lot of cases come out or reports that I would only assume that, yes, there are people who go and get the concealed carry that have been responsible with that. I think some of the dynamics are a little different, though, when you get to the university setting. I think the data is not in quite yet because universities are just now starting to open that door for faculty, staff, and even in some cases, students being able to carry.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chief.